Lena, your camera is all twisted. Okay, good. Welcome. Welcome and good day, community members. My name is Antoine Craigwell, and I'm President and CEO of DBGM, an organization here in New York City that is concerned with raising awareness of mental health impacting Black gay men to prevent their suicide. One of the things that a DBGM does, it's an annual conference called In My Mind. And this year, it's going to be on October 7th and 8th. Actually, back in 2018, we were honored to have Lena submit an essay that was included as part of our essay competition for our In My Mind conference. Actually, that was in 2019, not 2018. But one of the things that we've decided to do this year is to focus on LGBT people of color who live along the equator and in the global south. And so what we've done over the last 6 weeks is focused on our community members who live along the equator and in the global south. And today we are in the third day of the MENA region, and the MENA community, which is the Middle East and North Africa. They've chose their theme under the overall theme, which is the theme for the Global South Summit, is our expressions moving towards inclusivity. And the MENA region chose visibility deconstructs myths, lies, and prejudices. Today, we will talk about writing for visibility. So our program will go something like this. We will have a moment of silence in a moment. Then we will talk about the Global South Summit. And then I will introduce our moderator, Hadi Damian from Beirut Pride in Beirut. And he will then introduce our panelists, Majid Zahir and Lena Aziz. And then we will move on with the rest of the program. So, as with every occasion when we gather, DBGM makes it a policy and a priority to welcome into every single space that we inhabit, every single environment, every single occasion. We must honor and remember community members who have died. So we welcome into this space today community members that we've lost to homicide, suicide, HIV/AIDS, and the COVID-19 pandemic. We take a moment to remember and to welcome into this space community members who are struggling with the effects of the COVID virus pandemic and who still are struggling with HIV. We welcome also into this space our community members who are struggling against domestic and intimate partner violence, including in the LGBTQ plus communities, who struggle against family, community, and in the LGBT plus communities, and from state, who struggle against hate and oppression. Thank you. So this Global South Summit suggests that considering Black and people of color living along the equator and in the Global South are the largest population on the earth, and since LGBTQ plus people of color are present in all communities, we affirm that LGBTQ plus people of color constitute the largest sub-demographic in the world. We are aware that when international media report on or about LGBTQ people of color in the global South, these often follow a tragic event. Our community's pain is often pathologized and exploited. Rarely, if ever, do we hear, see, experience our community members' richness, beauty, vibrancy, and resilience. We hope to change that image. We want LGBTQ plus people of color who live along the equator and in the global South to be seen and heard. We want to highlight and celebrate LGBTQ people of color lives. Yet, even though representatives in the diaspora created a framework for this summit who live in the global North, it was imperative that community members reclaim their voice and provide the programming from their respective locales. They tell us, they show us who they are, how they live, how they celebrate, and how they mourn. We'd like to acknowledge and thank our planning team members who come from as far away as South Africa and Liberia, from Nigeria, from the Dominican Republic in the Caribbean, from Thailand, Guyana, from the Philippines, from here in the US, from Zimbabwe, and from India. We acknowledge and thank our partnering and participating organizations, Black Gay Blog, the Clemente, the In My Mind Conference, DBGM, XAD Productions, the Center, the LGBT Center in New York City, and Claimant Designs. So, like I said, the MENA region determined that their theme, Visibility Deconstructs Myths, Lies, and Prejudices, and over the last 2-3 days, they are talking about, on Monday, they talked about arts for visibility. Yesterday, they discussed thinking for visibility. Today, we will talk about writing for visibility, and later on today, there will be a discussion on diaspora for visibility. And I'd like to introduce our moderator, Hadi Damien from Beirut Pride. Hadi Damien is the founder of Beirut Pride and current co-president of Interpride. He works on the decriminalization of LGBT status in Lebanon and is a university lecturer. Hadi?
Thank you, Antoine. Happy to be here, and thank you for spearheading the organization of this summit. I have the honor to introduce our two fantastic speakers who are going to engage in a conversation about the importance of writing and how writing is a vector for visibility. This is what we're going to further understand from them. We're going to understand why they write. We're going to understand the topics that they breach, that they address, and it's going hopefully to be a very engaging conversation and an insightful one. Our two speakers are authors. They are ones who put their hearts, they put their souls into their texts, and they come from interesting backgrounds. They have very particular trajectories, and they got through several things for them to produce the literature and the text that they produce. They are Lina from Tunisia and Majid from Lebanon. Hello, both of you.
Hello. Thank you so much again for hosting me. It's such a pleasure and honor. So I'm looking forward for our talk today and discuss more, as you've mentioned, the beauty and the struggles people in Lebanon have to experience, and mainly marginalized people. So looking forward for it.
Hello, everyone. So I'm really happy to be here. Thank you, Antoine, and thank you, Hadi, for this amazing experience. I'm really looking forward for the conversation with Majid and Hadi. So I hope we're going to have fun.
It is no secret that people living in the so-called Arab world, in the MENA region, are not really versed in literature. They don't read much. So it's always quite peculiar to speak with writers. So I'm interested to understand and to get to know both of you more. So would you like to introduce, how would you want to introduce yourself, both Lina and Majid?
I'll start. I've entered the published writers in Lebanon recently, and being an author is something that I always wanted to become, and it's something that I'm enjoying at the moment. It's not about the fame, neither about the pride of me becoming a writer or satisfying my dreams. It's about the message I'm trying to deliver, the taboos I'm trying to break, or even the stories I'm willing to cover, and I've already started doing that in my first book. So that's how I like to introduce myself, or to be known among my people, or among those who don't know me at first.
So for me, I wouldn't call myself a writer or an author like Majid. I mean, he wrote a book, but I believe that I am someone who writes as an amateur. I believe that writing had a therapeutic effect for me. I mean, I write to express myself first. I mean, if I could afford going to a therapist, maybe I wouldn't write. I don't know, but I guess going through time, I now know that writing is a necessity for me, so I can express myself, and that if I don't write my own story, I mean, someone else would write it. I mean, we're seeing along the world that there are many shows and books about LGBT community that are not written by people from the community. So writing is to tell your own story rather than being told by someone else. We need to have like queer narratives that tell authentically speaking our stories. So yeah, that's why we need to write.
What do you write about? You mentioned mental health, you mentioned the therapist, I suppose you mentioned the mental health. You mentioned also reclaiming the narrative, taking ownership, giving voice. Tell us more about what you write about.
Okay, so for example, like in my essay that was featured in my Mind conference of 2019, I wrote about my experience as a queer woman living in an Arab country, which is Tunisia, in my case. So I wrote about my family, and I wrote about the way I was perceived, because I'm not out. So yeah, so I wrote about how I how I see my experience as a queer a woman in Tunisia.
And if you were to choose a specific part of this text to perhaps to read later on, but just now to give us this, to grow our appetite to understand further, like when you speak about you being a queer woman in Tunisia, what aspects are you really highlighting here?
I highlighted, I mean, how at first I saw myself as having a deviant beliefs, like, because we're living in a conservative society, and my family as well are conservative. So yeah, so I linked the way I have curly hair, which is unstraight, to the fact that I'm not straight, which was the funny part about my essay. Like, I made it revolve around being having all the traits that are unstraight, and that was foreshadowing being my sexual orientation. So yeah, it was a bit funny, the essay, but it had the story.
Curly is the new gay. Majd, Lina spoke about writing to reclaim a voice, to reclaim a narrative, writing for therapy, writing to address misconceptions and to change beliefs. What about you when you write? What do you write about?
I write in my book, Word of My Love in Beirut. I tackle 3 topics to be accurate. First was the mental health, and how does the lack of support for usual LGBTQI plus community in Lebanon and in the Arab world, what does it do to their self-esteem, and how do they perceive themselves, and how does it affect them in every part in their life, starting from the way they start seeking to love others instead of loving themselves, because they develop this intuition that they're not enough to be loved, or to be as equal as anyone else. So it starts from here. The lack of mental health was my first topic. The second was how we as human beings do judge each other based on the race, on gender, without looking into the person himself, the true essence of the person, disregarding his or her sexual orientation or his or her background. So that was the second thing. And the third was I wanted to showcase and to tell the world how does it how struggling and how difficult it is to live in a world where people would call you a monster, where laws would still criminalize you, where there is no safe hub for you to go as a person, as a human being. Like it's really shameful to live in a place where people perhaps they call you different names and based on something that is you, based on a sexual orientation, which I think it is more of a private thing than to be judged or decided by a law or by people. So I wrote for a change, and these were the topics that I came to discuss in my book. That's what I think what's gonna be my message for my future endeavor and what I want to become. I want to be a person who's leading a change towards the best.
And as we mentioned yesterday in the Thinking for Visibility panel, there is this very strong and growing new wave of young advocates in the Arab world that are fierce, that are strong, they believe in the personal impact, that personal strength, that are very far away from the victimhood, who take ownership for all the experiences that they inherited and the experiences that they live and the experiences that they reproduce and produce, and that they take them to another level. And it's very pleasing actually and reassuring to hear that both of you, Lena and Majid, are speaking to this. Majd, we're interested about your book. You mentioned it, Lena mentioned it earlier. Would you tell us more about it? Like what drove you to write? How has this experience been? Is it a fiction? If it is a fiction, how representative it is of you? Or is it not connected to you? So tell us more about the experience of writing and publishing.
Sure. In More Than I Love in Beirut, I projected my story, and to be honest, it's not only my story. It at a certain point, it does reflect for what I lived at a certain point. But no, I narrated other stories, other tragedies, and other experiences for those who had lived it and outlived it. But I think Joy and Adam, who are the main characters in this story, were the spokespeople for how life for different people, which I'm gonna always say marginalized people, because I consider these two characters are to be diverse as the word itself reflects. So with Joy and Adam, we live the life of how life tends to become when we allow ourselves to live under the pressure of norms. For me, Adam was the man who represented the sin and the perhaps the independency that we human beings strive to reach, where we'd say perhaps say something or experience anything without the fear of being judged and hated. Whereas Joy is the opposite, and I think he's the story for many people in Lebanon and in the Middle East, where Joy lives under the shadow of shame and hatred, and he doesn't love himself pretty much. So with this story, we're shedding the light on how this love story would evolve, knowing that the two characters are paradoxical. Adam is the character who loved himself and knew how to accept himself, and the Joy was total opposite. So imagine when these characters would come to meet, imagine the clash that would happen, though they loved each other and they will always love each other, but the more they loved each other, it seems that the more they hurt each other. And from here, we tackle the lack of support that these couples would have, starting from the mental health and acceptance, and as well how it's gonna evolve and how does it reflect and how does it affect the relations with their families, and what is the role families should play to support their kids disregarding of their sexual orientation, because I think families here in Lebanon or in the world, they do have a major responsibility accepting and supporting the child without being biased, without fathoming something that's not real and that's not reality, but they do practice it based on the fear and the scrutiny that the society might do. So that's briefly how the story evolves.
You have a video about this book. So Antoine,
yes.
Would we play it, please?
بين الماضي يلي عشته والمستقبل يلي بحلم فيه، حياتي مرتبطة بقصة. لما استرجع ذكرياتي في تجارب كتير أذتني بأوقات، بس كمان علمتني حارب، ومنها التنمر يلي كان عامل كبير بعدني عن الناس وعلقني بشخصيات رسمها خيالي. بس اليوم الخوف صار من الماضي، وبعد سنتين قطعوا مثل الحلم. الحبر نشف، الوراق انطبعت، وما بقى غير الناس تقرأ قصتي. Borderline Love in بيروت هي قصة بتحكي واقع كل شخص بيوم انكسر وما لقى حدا يحضنه. هي عتب كل حدا انظلم لأنه مختلف. قصتي هي خيال وحقيقة فيها الحلو والمر. هيدي رحلة علمتني إنه الحب هو حرية، هو النور بوجه العتمة، هو الثورة وبوجه التطرف والحقد. Borderline Love in بيروت هي القصة يلي كتبتها بس حتحكي لغة كتير ناس.
Lina.
Yes.
What are your impressions?
Okay, so I guess what Antoine said in the introduction, that we hope to change the image. I guess that's really important. I mean, but we don't only hope to change the image of the LGBT community being monsters, being deviant and all, but we only want to change the image of the LGBT representation in many shows, like I said, shows or novels or whatever written by by people who are not from the community. We need to reclaim our voices and to write the stories the way we see it. That's really important. And like Majid said in the video, like this is a story that is both fiction and both reality. I guess that's really important, that it spoke to many people and reached to many people. Like us as people from the LGBT community, we need to see products that we may reflect, that it mirrors our realities in a way, our voice that speaks to us as well. So that's really important.
What characters and what realities do we want portrayed when we speak about changing the discourse, and when we know that a lot of representation of the MENA region is based on tragic events, at least in the international press, and this is how LGBT people from the so-called global south are perceived, as people who are constantly brutalized, constantly smashed, constantly going through negative experiences and aggressive experiences. Yet at the same time, we hear both you and Majd reclaiming this narrative and revamping it and saying that no, there are other things to it. So here it's a bit confusing, correct? Because sometimes the reality is gloomy, and this is how it's perceived. At the same time, you don't want to play victim, and you want to take control, take ownership of the voice. So how do we navigate this?
Okay, so I believe that, I mean, when the story is not told by someone who's from the LGBT community, I mean, you can feel someone like as if it's like an I prevailing, and it's telling the story the way she wants to convey it and the way she sees it. You can like spend hours and hours finding some loops and some some flows in that story. But when it's told by someone who's from the community, I guess that many people from the community can see themselves in it. I mean, we're not talking about like a duality between fully dark stories and fully like, I don't know, like fairy tales. There is some mixture of both in reality. There's nothing fully dark or fully white. There's somehow dark and white. There's this mixture and this combination between both. So I guess that's really important to depict it in the stories told.
Majd?
My answer would be somehow not vague but broad. I do think what matters here is the sincerity and how would the writer himself be genuine and sincere by reflecting a story. To be honest, what was mentioned in my book is something that a part of it was experienced by me, but there were parts that I didn't personally experience. However, I decided to pull myself out from Joy and Adam and not to be meshed anymore. I decided to go with the extreme of how oppression or how feelings of sadness and misery could do to a certain person. Personally, I was in this story. Joy himself narrates incidents that I didn't live, but I was sincere enough to showcase the sentimental part of it and how would people do experience it. And I had a talk with a few people who experienced such a trauma, so that I would be sincere in transforming this message into real words, because what matters in here is being real, and that was my message from first. I want to be someone who is real, whose words would be listened, and because what I'm narrating in here is something that is present in our days, something that is being lived with by many people. And unfortunately, what was mentioned here, perhaps there are millions of stories of people who had experienced perhaps similar tragedies of love and loss and pain and love and all these feelings, but they were never told because like they left destroyed without sharing the stories. So I think I was by doing this book and publishing this book, I was paving the road and saying a word for others to talk out loud, to express their thoughts, excuse me, without being fear of being judged and ashamed. Because I don't think the social scrutiny and would stop, and people would always find a way to talk behind your back or disregarding the topic that you're trying to deliver and the message you're trying to deliver. So what matters here is being brave enough to talk about things that are not being talked about, that are not being discussed, and making sure that people are accepting, if not accepting this message, or perceiving this message, and we'll leave it to them whether to accept it or not. But what matters here is letting them know that there are things in this world and this society that is way more than what they think and what they believe, and all what they have to do is perhaps accept or come to know and acknowledge it. So that's, I think, the main goal of writing or a writer is delivering something and being real, and whether he experienced that or he experienced that message or that or whatever was mentioned in their book, what matters here is being sincere and genuine.
This is beautiful.
Thank you.
Lina?
Yes.
Majd mentioned,
yeah,
go on.
Sorry, I guess what Majd said, that what he wants to say, that he wants to deliver something real, something genuine, that is opposed to what is broadcasted broadcasted away. Like, this is important. I mean, like, we need to deliver something that breaks with the stereotypical image that is broadcasted in other stories and in other places. That I mean, like, it is true that, I mean, the LGBT community is a marginalized group, but it is under marginalized in the MENA region because there is no visibility, and there's oppression of state oppression or societal oppression, which is real. So writing is, like I said, like the name of the panel is like writing for visibility, writing to say that we're here, that we exist, that these stories exist, and even if they don't believe in it, I mean, like Mesh say, that's not important. Like what's important is to speak up and to say that we're here, that we exist, that this is a story that maybe that is true and that is genuine and authentic. So yeah, that's something that's really important that Mesh said.
Very interested in understanding how you perceive writing to be a tool of visibility. This is the name of our panel, and you know, people would wonder, because we often have this idea that only people who placard or only people who are in participating in protests, burning tires, and so on, are people who really are being this advocates. And no, there's no hierarchy in advocacy. There's no hierarchy in activism. And not everybody is comfortable being in the street, being among big crowds or crowds. Not everybody is comfortable, being in spaces where things are, the sound is loud and people are shouting, etc. So yes, so whether we're expressing the visibility through our artistic expression or through our writing and literature is equally important, because we're speaking to different crowds who would not relate to another expression. And again, it's very important that we understand that there is no hierarchy between how we do things. And at the end of the day, a book, a text, they are here to stay, they are marked, they are time-stamped. We know when, which day, which period, which time. We can always put them in easy context. We can go back to them, and they stay not only as a memory, but they stay also as a tangible text that we can go to, and it can, we know of texts that have been crossing thousands of years. So this is the importance of writing. But tell me more about your perception about this intersection between writing and visibility. I'm interested to see what is your take, you, Lina, and you, Majd, about this visibility and why visibility is important.
Personally speaking, I think writing paves the road for me being visible. And you're right, visibility has a certain scale, perhaps, for someone to be recognized. But there's always a way where you could push forward with your thoughts and what is present in a certain society. I think this book, it's gonna be always stay there. The visibility you're talking about is obvious and it always show. And I'm gonna say something from a part of the book where here I say that here is one example of the visibility which has different forms. And one part of the book, and it was the last part I mentioned, the struggles I came to highlight in this novel are not but a small fraction of endless, ugly, and barbaric cases happening against fellow humans on a daily basis. Take a second to imagine how ugly what I'm going to say is. In my country, people are still abandoned and killed by their family members, bullied, discriminated against, imprisoned, harassed, and raped because of their sexual orientation, and without any laws to protect them. I feel vexed and inflamed to watch people demanding rights that are ideally endowed by the Creator to everyone without exception. So I think here was one part of the visibility that I wanted to reach one day, and which I'm trying to do is saying that human beings, disregarding of their sexual orientation or their backgrounds, they do have the right to exist and they do have the right to feel safe. That's perhaps the humane thing or the crucial thing, feeling safe, and that they do have the right to exist. So pushing forward with these boundaries forms the first step for me towards making my writing and my words a way to express my thoughts and a way for awakening myself, the part which I always felt like it's never gonna show light because I was afraid. So in here, these words paved the road for me to become visible. The words in here, they're gonna always stay disregarding what laws are followed in Lebanon and what rules and how it is discriminatory in Lebanon, but no one could remove the spirit or silence my voice from saying that we need to change, and the change is the only path towards coexisting and peace. So for me, that's how I perceive visibility and writing. They're always tangent together.
Gina.
Okay, so I believe that first, let me say, like the same as we believe that there is no hierarchy in fights and struggles, I think we should all believe there's no hierarchy also in activism. All activism matter, and they are as important as another form of activism. So I believe that writing, why the importance of writing for visibility? I guess that literature has an everlasting effect throughout all ages and years. Like when we study, for example, I don't know, maybe Virginia Woolf's literature or T.S. Eliot's literature, the fact that they are queer and the fact that we have some how do I say, some fact that they are queer and not straight, I guess that gives us a whole other point of studying their literature and linking it to their reality as being queer at that age. And so I believe that these kinds of literature and these kinds of books have changed the reality of those communities in Western countries, and changing it to the better and having more rights, I guess, between inverted commas, more rights and more freedoms. So I guess that the fact that we're witnessing and now a flow of queer literature in the MENA region is important so we can have in the future traces about the realities of those people at that certain period, which is important as part of like we say historiography, history. I forgot the word, like to historicize the fights and to historicize their stories.
It meets what we were discussing, or this meets what we were discussing earlier, actually, about the importance of literature as being a tangible asset that we can always go back to, and we can contextualize things and check the realities of people at a specific time. Because one of the things that LGBT groups all over the world constantly reproduce is somehow a complete erasure of our history. Every single generation, every single group of LGBT people who comes to the table or who engage in conversation constantly somehow behaves or acts as if they were the person to reinvent the wheel all the time. And it's very sad that often we do not get to compound and collate all the work that has been happening before us and that allows us to be wherever we are today. And we see this in LGBT plus circles, when you have younger people dismiss older people on the grounds of, you don't know much about it, things have changed, we don't listen to this music, we don't do things this way, etc. And it's incredible, because even my work about the decriminalization of LGBT status, I do a lot of reading about political maneuvering, if I shall say. And when you read the history of decriminalization of LGBT status in countries such as France, the US, the UK, when you discuss decrim with people from Botswana, from India, both decriminalization happened quite recently. When you read the stories that explain how we made progress and how we got marriage equality in places like the US and France, you understand how many commonalities exist, how much we have in common across all these struggles, whether technical tools that we can leverage, whether discourses to respond to. When we look at the ways LGBT plus hate is expressed, for example, in the MENA region, today. When we look at videos from earlier years to see how LGBT plus hate was expressed on TV and in the public space and in the private space and in the so-called Western world, we realize that it's absolutely the same discourse. Yes, there are different nuances. Yes, it's perhaps it is a different language, but at the end of the day, it's the same. So we better acknowledge that we're standing on the shoulders of giants and that we need to take what is there, take ownership for it, adopt it, adapt it, and then move forward. Because when we claim to be doing some work to improve the realities of people, then we better really deliver rather than weaponize LGBT people and turn our LGBT status into an ideology, which is a very unfortunate thing happening. Both of you spoke about, you often spoke about feelings, you often spoke about self-esteem, perception, mental health, etc. Lina, when you're writing your story as a queer woman living in Tunisia. What would you like to share with us? What do we need to be aware of? What struggles do we need to be conscious of? What are you highlighting?
Okay, so I guess like being queer in Tunisia is being part of a group that is marginalized, and by law, homosexuality is criminalized and penalized in Tunisia. So we're talking about like being illegal in your own country. That's firsthand. I guess second, like living and being a woman, the context of being a woman is being also oppressed as being one. So there's like this double-edged sword, like being oppressed as a woman and being oppressed being gay. So these are two. But also, as lesbians, as a queer women, we're not visible enough even within the LGBT community. There's even the law that criminalizes homosexuality only criminalizes like gays because we have a tangible proof that they with the anal test, which is unconstitutional and which is inhuman. So even the law doesn't criminalize the same way as it criminalizes the gays. It doesn't criminalize lesbian women. So being in this equation of not being even equal within the LGBT community is make us rethink all of it, like being so yeah. Also, I guess like the reality of queer women in Tunisia is not very. You cannot be safe like being perceived as masculine. This is the stereotype in Tunisia, and I want to share a story about an activist who is a queer woman in Tunisia, that she was in the first rows in every protest, otherwise against some laws or some police brutality, or even in the first rows to say loud that we are against the criminalization of homosexuality. She was persecuted by the police, arrested many times, and now, like 2 days ago, no, I guess 1 week ago, she sought asylum for in France. So that's really unfortunate. I mean, like the future of every queer woman should be to seek asylum and to leave the country, just because she couldn't live here with all the persecution and the oppression and the discrimination that we live. So I don't want to be that this is the only reality here in Tunisia. Like that's why we need to make a change, and this change could not be achieved. Will be achieved if we have this visibility and we have this advocacy, either with literature or with any other form of activism. I mean, like we said before, like all forms of activism matter. So yeah, that's pretty much it.
You said that the criminalization of lesbians is not the same as the criminalization of, let's say, a gay man. Does this difference create? Well, obviously, we acknowledge that. Well, I suppose that lesbian women are not calling to be criminalized actually at the same way that gay men are unfortunately. But does this create hierarchies within LGBT circles? Like, would people say that this group of people is more criminalized than the others, so this should do things differently, or does any of this happen?
Well, I believe that there's a sort of hierarchy and within the LGBT circles. I mean, like being you can be gay, but you have the privilege of being a man, but a woman is being gay and being a woman. Those are two discriminations. So, but I guess that even in I don't know, in the big association of LGBT advocacy in Tunisia, we don't see many women in the first rows. We only see gay men being the first rows. So I guess this may give us like this idea of lesbian women that do not really exist in Tunisia, because lesbianism is linked in the minds of people with porn, unfortunately, or with male fantasies. So I guess that for me, like, writing is this tool that we say that we exist and we're not, and we shouldn't be over sexualized or fetishized. That this is like important for me.
It is a reality. It is a historic and current reality that there is no much visibility for women in LGBT spaces, circles, and organizations as well. And it's unfortunate that still in 2021 we often call for more women to come forward and so on. And it seemed like, why do we always say that there aren't much women at the forefront, and what should be done to ensure a stronger participation of women?
I guess it's linked to this solidarity that should be more stronger in the LGBT circles between the gays and the lesbians. Firsthand, that's important, and second, I guess that queer women should, I don't want to say it, but it's up to them, but should reclaim their voices and speak up for themselves with given alternatives of this discourse that we see in the media and the mainstream media. So that's why I believe that having maybe having some forms of books or shows that portray the reality of queer women in the MENA region, in our context, that will be very important for other queer women to look up for and maybe speak up for themselves. So I guess that's what matters.
So for you, the participation of women in queer spaces essentially happens through books, through literatures, through artistic expression, more than being part of organization, or to be playing the parts that men have been playing so far. Correct?
I don't see that there's like, I don't distinguish between two forms of activism. I believe that both of them may intersect at some point, or maybe as equal as they are. I'm just saying that queer women should be more present in the LGBT circles, more and having like higher positions, maybe in some organization, and being as equal as the other gay men. That's what I'm saying.
Actually, what you're saying is very important, because it's very true that you often say that in queer organizations, we don't have much presence of queer women. But it's unfortunate that we constantly reduce LGBT spaces to organizations. And we should remember that actually organizations are only part of the civil society, which in turn is only part of the multi-sectors, the various sectors that all come into play actually to not only improve LGBT realities, but where LGBT realities exist and unfold actually. And perhaps if in some LGBT spaces there is more presence for a specific gender, through other expressions, perhaps another gender may be more present. But when we're looking at the LGBT spaces, we can't really be we can be very limited by only looking at organizations or at different places. It's very insightful actually. what you're referring to.
Yeah, but I guess like the organization are the most ones who are under the, how do I say it, like more visible in the international community and even in the country and in the eyes of the government and the government. So yeah, I mean, that's why I'm focusing more on association and organization, because for us, like in Tunisia, as I said, like when we talk about the reality of the LGBT community in Tunisia, we feel obliged to talk to the work of these organizations that deals with the LGBT community questions. We feel they're sometimes intertwined and really related to each other in our context, I guess.
And this is precisely what happens in places that criminalize LGBT status, because there are a lot of abuses that take place, not only from the state towards LGBT plus people themselves, but also within LGBT people themselves. And it creates a very toxic and a very abusive environment. We're seeing it in every single country that criminalizes LGBT status. And there is literally nothing to be proud of. It's quite an alarming situation that we keep on talking to. So yes, we do meet you here, and the points you're bringing are very strong points. They are points I personally relate to, and I totally believe that we need to plan other panels and other sessions actually to discuss this. Like, what roles for organizations? Do we need to constantly be part of organizations and groups to do advocacy? What is the presence and the power of the individual? What is our own impact? How do we coordinate with the other when we don't see eye to eye with each others? How do we can still make progress? Why are women not really present? Is it because we are taking over, some are taking over all the place, or because they are simply not anymore interested in engaging with people who keep on talking and reproducing a discourse over the year that is quite exhausting? Is it because of continuous microaggression? Is it because simply they don't believe in the way that the current people are leading, how they are leading their business? I myself used to think, before I started Beirut Pride, with friends and people around, that the LGBT circles, and especially gay people, in particular gay men, would be much more women friendly, whatever that means, because we come from the same, or at least we live oppression, we live forms of being put aside, so we could somehow relate. And therefore I was shocked when I saw the amount of silly criticism, of uncalled for criticism, of comments and gossip, and the lack of elegance, the cheapness, and often the vulgarity with which people address each other, and the misogyny. And I was quite shocked, actually.
I have to add something over here.
This.
If I could say, I do think this form of oppression, which gay men or the gay men in Lebanon are reflecting against each other or in their effort, it comes with the way how they grow up. Like, I think it's still here quite something which is normal had become in the community, when you say, like, he's like a woman, or like he's feminine, which became a tag of shame. So I think it starts here, and it really brings the attention that there's a lack of certain, as you mentioned, there's a lack of certain knowledge and education. People who are marginalized. So look at the hypocrisy here. Although they're marginalized, they do still tend to marginalize and bully each other. So instead of coming with each other as one group, as one pack, so that stand in solidarity, so that they could fight for a better future or a better world, you see them here fighting each other, and which really amazes me of how cheap, right, some people could go with their comments, and how they would bully each other based on things that are not true, that do not reflect the real essence of any human being, but just they say that perhaps to gain attention or fame, which unfortunately became a way for others to present themselves in a certain community because they lack the knowledge. So instead, they use these fake titles so that they would fill the place where they sit in or where they exist.
Certainly meet you there. I certainly meet you there when you speak to this. And we grow up in spaces, we all, wherever we are in the world, we grow up in spaces where we learn a lot from the people we spend time with, whether they are our parents, whether they are our immediate family, whether they are our neighbors or whoever we hang out with, or we're familiar with, people in school, our teachers, society at large, what we see on TV, etc. And often we get we absorb all of this and then we reproduce it. And this is why actually, when we started this panel talking about domestic violence within LGBT people, this exists, it's a fact. And when we look into the way or the analysis or the study of domestic violence in LGBT circles and LGBT households, you realize that there is no much difference between the domestic violence in a queer space, in a queer house, and in a straight one. And you mentioned earlier, you said that education, we don't have much education, and I want here to say that often people would criticize this statement by saying that this is an oppressive statement, but actually I disagree. Because when we refer to education, we don't really refer to formal education. We don't refer to people having the means or not, or the capacity or not to go to university or to school. We refer about our self-education, what we do, what we read, what we listen to, how we spend our time, whether it's a choice, how we spend our 15 minutes or whatever amount of minutes we spend on our social media or whatever. And it's obvious that minorities, and I don't like this word, because it already entails oppression and domination within itself. But a group of people that have always been repressed and they have always reproduced a discourse of victimhood tend to oppress themselves. And we see this internalized hate when people tell you you're not gay enough, you're not woman enough, you're not man enough. It doesn't only come from the non-queer people towards us, it comes also within our own circles, and this is where it hurts most, and this is where it prevents all the advances. And this is why actually a lot of LGBT people would say LGBT people would say that the LGBT are the worst enemy. We are our worst enemy in many cases.
Here where it comes where people should for real start educating themselves and learning more about what should be said and what should not be said. And without having these fundamental and these crucial changes and this crucial knowledge, I don't think we'd ever reach a place where we could stop calling ourselves a minority. And we'll always be a minority when the same people who are being oppressed are playing are doing the same thing to their group and to their people. So as long as this chain and this cycle keeps on happening over and over, I don't think we'd ever reach a place where we'll have a safe place and a safe zone and safe hub for everyone to coexist. Because again and again, I'm gonna say coexisting is the only and safest path for everyone to be and to live.
This is a passionate conversation and you are running out of time. Yes. It's obvious that actually for us to bring forward all these ideas, we need to produce, we need to be visible. Lina, shall we expect anytime soon a publication for you?
Oh, I feel the pressure, but I don't know, maybe one day. One day I'll collect all my writings. I don't know yet.
That's lovely. But let's stay in touch.
I want to say something, maybe.
Yes, of course.
Yeah. So I want to make a little remark about the word minority. I don't really go with the word minority. I believe that the LGBT community are a minorized group, if I'm right, like minorisé, un groupe minorisé. So which is like the outcome of a systematic and oppressive regime followed by the governments and all the states of the world. So yeah, that was my remark. Maybe you could agree with me. I don't know.
We have a lot of content for future panels and conversation, actually. So thank you very much, Lina. Thank you very much, Majid, for this beautiful conversation.
Thank you, Hadi.
I know, Majid, we go to your website, Majid Zahir, and we can Google you, we can check your book, we can order it. Lina's, yes, go on.
I'm looking forward to see maybe one day Majid's books in Tunisia, maybe in libraries in Tunisia. That would be amazing.
Fantastic. Antoine, back to you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Hadi. One of the things that I was really interested in this conversation that I was hearing, and I'm just, and you may not be able to answer the question now, but I'm wondering for both Lena and for Majid, how are you going to incorporate into your characters, into what you're writing? How would you incorporate some of the concepts and the constructs, the oppressions, the difficulties that you're experiencing in your communities? How will you incorporate those into your characters? And so that you can represent those communities, represent those difficulties, represent those differences in your characters. So you don't have to answer that now, but it's just something that just jumped up in my brain.
I'll say
Yeah.
one word: compassion. It's all about compassion, and it will always be there. And I think there's a space for everyone to live in this world. And as long as we have the compassion needed for us to live and to love each other and to accept the other, disregarding of our differences, that's, I think, the best thing we could learn from our stories, and whether it is published or not. And that's one we proudly call each other human beings. Thank you.
Thank you, Majid. Lena, do you want to jump in? Because I didn't require an answer, but since Majid decided to go ahead and answer, you might as well. I can't leave you out.
I didn't really understand your question. Like, what's the word you used? I didn't really understand it. Like, what's the question about?
I was asking how would you incorporate into your characters when you're writing to reflect your current situation, what life is like, and what life is like for other LGBT communities or LGBT members in communities in Tunisia and in the Middle East, in the MENA region. How would you represent them? How would you incorporate them? And how would you make them appear so that you can then tell those stories, or so that they can then be represented through you? Because I remember the beginning of this conversation, you talked about that people are writing about you rather than you about LGBT having the opportunity to write for themselves. So in a sense, as a lesbian in the MENA region, how would you then represent and incorporate the issues that the communities are struggling and dealing with in your characters, in your stories?
I guess, like, first thing that when I represent my characters, I will present them as authentic as possible, and that speaks to me firsthand. That's the most important thing. But I guess what's really important that we represent the characters as not being over sexualized, because we see that in literature or in TV shows or series or movies or whatever, that the existence of these characters are usually revolve around sex and other stuff. So that would be the most thing that I would emphasize on while representing my characters.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Lena, and thank you very much, Majid. Hadi, thank you very much. So let me just pull up the final slide, which is talking about later on today, where we will focus on diaspora for visibility, and that will bring us to the conclusion of our 6 weeks of this LGBT People of Color Global South Summit. So later on today, we will talk about diaspora for visibility, the final part of the MENA segment program for the Global South Summit, but also the conclusion of the Global South Summit. So thank you once again, Lena. Thank you, Majid. Hadi, thank you very much again for moderating this. Yes, I'm sorry, Majid, you said?
It was a pleasure. Thank you again for hosting me. Thank you. Thank you, Hadi. Thank you, Eli. Thank you, Lena.
Thank you.
Yes, and it was a pleasure meeting you both. So let me start the Facebook Live.